Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to begin today's session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. For Sarah and myself, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. On behalf of Carers New South Wales, I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people on the call with us today. My name is Natalie, and on your screen there is Sarah. We are from the Young Carer program at Carers New South Wales, and a big part of our role is to support and raise awareness of young people 25 years and under who are helping to provide unpaid care to a family member or friend living with a disability, mental illness, drug or alcohol dependency, chronic condition, terminal illness, or who is frail and ageing. We are very excited today to be joined by Claire Williams. Claire is a Community Engagement Officer at Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. She has worked in the role for 15 years. Prior to this, she worked for a lot of not-for-profit agencies, including Life Force Suicide Prevention, Canteen, and Save the Children Fund, working on youth empowerment projects. Claire has a degree in psychology. She has 3 teenage children, a husband, and a beautiful Moodle puppy called Potato. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us this afternoon, and I'll hand over to you to deliver this session.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and just to talk to you a little bit about my organisation, which is Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Just thought we'd touch on today a little bit about anti-discrimination law in New South Wales, because it can be a little bit confusing, and I'm sure some of you have heard of lots of different agencies. So we're just going to break down the basics about discrimination. So today we're just going to have a chat about discrimination laws, the types of unlawful discrimination in New South Wales, and how, most importantly, you can make a complaint or even an inquiry about discrimination using our service. And I'm going to explain, whilst I'm talking to you, I'll explain a little bit about COVID-19 engagement and what happened during the COVID-19 period as well. So first off, what do we do as an organisation? As I said, we're called Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, so we're a government organisation, and it's our role to answer inquiries about discrimination. So we have an inquiry line, which I'll give you the details of afterwards, and you can ring up and you don't have to reveal who you are when you use our inquiry service. It can be confidential. And you can ask questions about your inquiry about discrimination. We also handle complaints of discrimination. And if you decide you want to make a complaint to us, we do have to know your name and the name of the other party as well. We raise awareness about discrimination and its impacts. And in saying that, I'm really interested in young carers, and I'm interested in young people in New South Wales. And my project that I'm working at the moment is youth, and trying to have a look at what are some of the issues that impact you as a young person, and specifically you as a young carer. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also manage some applications for exemptions from the Act. That sounds a little bit complicated, but I'll break that down in a minute. And we advise the government about discrimination issues. So when we get asked questions, we give feedback about what's happening in the community. So what is discrimination? So under the New South Wales legislation, discrimination is treating someone unfairly because of a characteristic they have or they're assumed to have that is protected under New South Wales law. So I'm treating you differently, for example, because you're Chinese. I'm treating you differently because you're Aboriginal. I'm treating you differently because you have a disability. I'm treating you differently because you're gay. I'm treating you differently because you're a carer. So there's some of the examples of discrimination that people might experience. And I'm going to tell you all the types of discrimination we cover as well. So just a bit of a question for you before we go into the legislation. Why do carers experience discrimination? Why do you think that's the case? Or do they? Do you think that carers experience discrimination? Some of the reasons may be people experience discrimination for a number of reasons, and that might be power, People feel more powerful when they discriminate against others. They may feel a sense of privilege. It may be attitudes they have because of media or stereotypes. And sometimes people simply have a prejudice against other members or minority members of the community. Another question. So why do some people complain regarding discrimination? They decide to complain to an agency that may assist them, and others never complain. Some seek help and others don't. So the answer is some people don't complain because of a lack of knowledge, a level of fear or anxiety. I talk to a lot of community groups and they talk about a fear of retribution. They're really worried there's going to be some payback. If they make a complaint, someone might treat them worse, someone might bully them or harass them more, or they may lose their part-time employment. Some people feel sometimes a lack of trust also. So I deal with a lot of people who sometimes say, why would I trust a government service? And again, I mentioned before, but a lot of people are concerned about losing their job, whether it be full-time, part-time or casual, if they do make a complaint. So there are different grounds or types of discrimination covered in anti-discrimination law. And those grounds or types of discrimination include disability, which includes diseases and illnesses, and it includes mental illness. And I'll give you a definition of disability discrimination in a minute. Sex discrimination, which is discriminating against a man or a woman, which includes pregnancy and breastfeeding discrimination as well. It includes race discrimination, so discriminating against someone because of their racial background. Age discrimination, discriminating against people because they're too young or they're too old or simply not the right age. And when I've done a lot of work with young people, they've talked a lot about age discrimination in their part-time jobs. And they have also talked about sexual harassment in part-time employment as well. Marital or domestic status, that's about whether you're married, you're single, or you're in a same-sex relationship. So treating someone differently because they're married, single, or in a same-sex relationship. We cover homosexuality, so whether you're gay or you're lesbian. We cover transgender status, so whether you are a man who's transitioned to be a woman or a woman who's transitioned to be a man, or simply living as the opposite sex. We include discrimination for people who are transgender. We also cover carers' responsibilities. So that in our legislation, in New South Wales anti-discrimination legislation, carers' responsibility is only covered in employment. And what that means is your employer has to be fair in supporting you with your carers' responsibilities. And I'll break that down in the next couple of slides in terms of what exactly that means. We also include sexual harassment. So treating somebody unfairly, touching them inappropriately, repeatedly asking them out, or inappropriately touching somebody. We specifically, in terms of our complaints of discrimination at Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, the most complaints we receive every year are about disability discrimination. They are also about race discrimination and also about sexual harassment. So I just wanted to break down disability discrimination because some of you may find that if you want to make a complaint to our service, you may be wanting to make a complaint on behalf of the person you're caring for. So disability discrimination is when someone's discriminated against unfairly because of their physical disability, their physical illness or disease, their mental or psychiatric illness, their intellectual disability, their learning difficulty, their disfigurement, or their Hep C or HIV status. Now, disability discrimination isn't just about long-term illnesses or disabilities. It's also about short-term things. So, for example, if you were to have COVID-19, and that would be a temporary thing generally, and you were discriminated against because you'd had COVID-19, or someone you lived with had COVID-19, that would be covered under disability discrimination. Yeah, so that's just a breakdown of disability discrimination. And so here's carers' responsibilities. I mentioned we only cover employment for carers' responsibilities. So that's when someone's discriminated against unfairly when you're in employment while caring for another person. So when you're caring for someone else, such as a child, a parent, a grandchild, a grandparent, a brother, a sister, a step relation, a de facto partner, a spouse, an in-law, or a former spouse or former de facto. So what that means is that your employer has to be fair with your needs. So for example, with your part-time employment, say you work part-time at a local food outlet, and just say you've been given a number of shifts, but they're the days that you have to do specific things for your parent that you're caring for, then your employer has to be fair about your needs. So you might say, I want to swap shifts with somebody else, and I've pre-organized that, or I want you to help me swap shifts with somebody. Or you might say, can I work, different hours on a different day? But what is important is that your employer is fair and that they work with you to try and resolve it. Now, sometimes that might mean that it doesn't work for the organization. And within the negotiation period, they may say, sorry, it's not working out for us and we don't think that you can swap those shifts. We really need you to work them. Or they may agree to it. But what is not fair, for example, is if they say, sorry, that doesn't work for us, you're fired. So the sorts of carers' responsibilities complaints we get are generally from people who've experienced have been fired from their employment, or their manager in employment hasn't been very, very fair in negotiating with them. I have to say we don't get a lot of complaints from young carers. And one of the reasons is I don't believe a lot of young carers do know that we exist and do know how to use our service, and do know that you can be any age to make a complaint to our service. You don't have to be 18. And also don't realise that you don't need a solicitor to use our service. So that's some of the reasons, I think. So that's part of what today is, explaining to you how you can make a complaint to our service. So it's important to know, generally, anti-discrimination law, discrimination is against the law in public places. Now, I mentioned before that carers' responsibilities is only covered in employment, but all the other grounds or types of discrimination that I talked about are covered in other areas. Now, you might ask, why is that? Well, the law was written in 1977, and we listen to the community and we make recommendations to the government based on what the community has said. So maybe that's one thing that you want to talk to us about, whether you think that is fair or not fair. So discrimination is against the law in employment, so at work when trying to get a job, or when you're working, at goods and services, shops, banks, using government services, cafes and hospitals. Public education, so when you're at public schools, TAFE and university. Accommodation, so when you're renting a house or a flat, or attempting to rent a house or a flat. And also at registered clubs, so any club that sells alcohol or has gambling machines. So we handle complaints of discrimination. I mentioned before you can ring our inquiry service, but if you decide to make a formal complaint, your complaint of discrimination is covered by an act of law called the Anti-Discrimination Act in 1977. And you're all a lot younger than me, but in 1977, when the Act was written, there were certain regulations in place that weren't very fair. So for example, if you're a woman and you're a teacher, once you'd had your first child, you had to retire. Or if you wanted to join the police, for example, or be an air steward for one of the airlines, you had to be a certain height. So the law was written in 1977 to address those issues. And how the law changes is it's been added to up until 2021, but it still needs to be changed and reviewed and updated. So if you make a complaint to us, we can help you and the organisation you're complaining about find a way of resolving the matter according to the law. But our complaints need to be made in writing, but you can lodge it in any language. So when I say writing, you can email us your complaint, or you can handwrite it, or you can download a complaint form. And if you have any questions about the complaint process, you can contact our inquiry service. And as I said, that your calls to the inquiry service are confidential, and you can find out some more information about making a complaint. And if, for example, your complaint is about another matter, we can refer you to the correct organisation that would deal with your complaint. So we resolve things by using a method called conciliation, and it's a conciliation conferences. Now, conciliation used to be face-to-face before COVID, and since COVID, you'll realise we're doing this online training session. A lot of things used to be face-to-face. So we're actually using Microsoft Teams at the moment, or telephone shuttling to do our conciliations, so that we can resolve it without face-to-face contact. But conciliation is an opportunity for both parties to come together to discuss the complaint and find a resolution. It's a private face-to-face meeting, well, online at the moment, where both parties get to have their say and have some control over how the complaint is resolved. But our conciliation officers from Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, their service is free to run the conciliation for you, but they're impartial and they don't take sides. So they're neutral during the whole process, and they're there to try and help you, both parties, you and the agency that you're making a complaint about, to try and resolve it. So what are the possible outcomes of a conciliation? Well, that's what we ask you. If you're making a complaint against an agency, we ask you as a young person to think about what will fix this for you, what will make it better. So we would ask you to include that into your complaint, the complaint form that you lodge with us, or the letter. So what is it that you want or need that will resolve it? We can't, again, we're neutral, we can't promise you'll get that. The agency you're making a complaint about has to agree to that. So do you want an apology or a statement of regret from the organisation? Do you want your job reinstated, a transfer or promotion you were denied? Is it compensation from hurt or anxiety? For example, so somebody was denied access to a shop, for example, or a pub or a club. Do you want compensation because of that matter, because of the hurt or anxiety, or even lost wages if you lost your job? Access. Do you want access to a previously denied job opportunity or service? Workplace education and staff training. So do you want the workplace to be trained, or the shop or the cafe to be trained about anti-discrimination legislation? Or would you like that workplace to have a change in policy so that they're aware, for example, about carers' responsibilities and being flexible? So sometimes we realise that some people will ring our inquiry service and some people will lodge complaints, but other people don't feel confident or happy to let us know what's happening. So you can let us know confidentially what's happening in your community through our community incident survey. So we collect information about incidents of discrimination so that we can as an organisation be aware of emerging issues. And it's really important that we know what's happening for young people and young carers. We won't disclose your identity if you don't feel comfortable. By all means, ring our inquiry service and make a complaint to us. But if you don't feel comfortable, if you just want to let us know confidentially about something that's happened, then you can go to surveymonkey.com and the address there, /r/AD New South Wales -let us know. So step by step, there are a number of things that I would love you to know in terms of if you would like to make a complaint to us. So how can you do that? And this is the most important information that you'll go away with today as a young carer or as a staff member. And also, just as a family member or a peer, you may find that this information supports you and your family and your community. So as I mentioned, you can phone Anti-Discrimination New South Wales and make a confidential inquiry about a complaint. You can either ring our free 1800 number, which I'll give you at the end of this session, or you can ring our direct number. At the moment, due to COVID, your call doesn't go direct to an inquiry officer. Your call goes to an answering service and somebody will get back to you within that day, Monday to Friday. Our inquiry officers only work Monday to Friday. Your call is confidential, free, and as I mentioned before, we're impartial. So it's our job to provide you with information about what you're ringing us up about and try and assist in what would help resolve your complaint. But as community workers from representative bodies, you can also assist somebody making a complaint, or even as a family member, or as a friend, as a son, as a daughter, as a mother. You can assist somebody making a complaint on their behalf, but the other person has to agree that you've said it's okay to make that complaint. We call the other party you're making the complaint about the respondent. So respondents do have to know who's made a complaint. They do have to know your identity if you decide to make a formal complaint. I also didn't mention something important as well. When you ring our inquiry service, you can also ring our translation service and you can speak to us in your own language. I'll give you that information at the end. You can write your complaint in your own language. You can also record your complaint or place it in Braille, and I'll mention that. I think this is mentioned in the next slide. So if you decide to formally make a complaint to us, as I mentioned, you can write your complaint, you can download a complaint form, we can post you a complaint form. A lot of people don't have access to the internet, so we can post them out to you, or you can download it off the internet yourself. You can email us your complaint, just simply write us a letter. Complaints, as I mentioned, can be made in any language, in Braille, or recorded on an audio cassette or on a USB. If you need assistance in making a complaint, because we have to remain neutral, it's often there may be a community legal centre that is able to assist you in making your complaint to us, and we'd be able to direct you to that agency. So what should your complaint include? So if you're being bullied and harassed, we need to know as much information as possible. So what are the contact details of the person or the organisation you're complaining about? Are there witnesses? Now, it's important to say that's just there if there are witnesses, but you mightn't have any witnesses, and that's really okay. What are the times or dates it happened? What are the full names of people involved? And most importantly, we talked about before, how would you like the complaint to be resolved? Is it a letter of apology? Is it policy changes? Is it compensation? So you really need to think about that. Now, during COVID-19, I mentioned that I would talk about that. We had a lot of people come and want information sessions online regarding our organisation, because we found that the Asian community, anybody who was Asian background, whether they were Korean, Thai, Chinese, from Hong Kong or Singapore, etc., people were being specifically targeted, and they were being abused on the street because of their cultural background, or their race. So we found that people were being abused, shouted at, spat at, some terrible cases of discrimination. So during that time, we worked with the police as well, because if somebody is being vilified publicly, being targeted because of their race, for example, and there's a number of people involved, it often becomes a matter for the police due to being a crime, or because it's become a vilification matter. So we worked with the police and we talked to the community about contacting the police and talking about CCTV cameras as well. So I think the point is sometimes people don't know who is the discriminator. Sometimes it can just happen in the street. And if you don't know who has discriminated against you, sometimes the best agency to talk to first is the police. However, if your complaint, in terms of your complaint, you do know about the person and the organisation and you have some information, then you can provide that to us in your complaint to us. And it's important to say that you don't need witnesses to make a complaint to the Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. It is simply your word against the respondent, the other party. Now, once we receive your complaint letter, we'll be in contact with you to say we've received it and whether it fits within our legislation. And then what we're going to do is the respondent, so the other group you're complaining about, are entitled to reply to the complaint. So because we're being fair and neutral, we need to understand what those respondents are saying about what happened. So we'll state that we've received this complaint from you and that we believe that you have alleged that a number of things have happened, and then we'll ask the respondent to reply. And they're given a certain amount of time to respond to that. Then once they've responded, we'll organise that conciliation conference that I mentioned before. Now, again, this is a free service provided. So all our services are free, our inquiry service, our conciliation service, and the community information talks that I do as well. You can request those directly. These are all free services provided by Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, but where we remain neutral and attempt to resolve the matter as the best outcome for both parties. So I mentioned at a conciliation conference we're neutral, but also when you ring us on the inquiry line. So sometimes some very distressing things have happened to people. So if you ring us and tell us about what's happened in terms of the discrimination, the bullying and harassment, we will understand that that's been quite difficult for you, but we can't, for example, if you were to ask us, should I make a complaint? We can't make that decision for you because we have to remain neutral. So we can simply provide you with the information and suggest that for example, what you're telling us does sound like it falls within the legislation, and suggest that this is how you can make a complaint. The time frame from beginning to end, a lot of people are worried about how long a complaint will take. And we realise that it's a stressful time when you've experienced discrimination, bullying and harassment. So on average, can take 4 months, and complaints are processed in order unless they're urgent. So we realise that is a significant amount of time. Also, it's important to mention we have a 12-month window in terms of if something has happened to you in the past 12 months, you can make a complaint to us. If something happened to you 2 years ago or longer than 12 months, please still forward us a complaint if you feel that you would like to complain to us, but you must explain to us why it has taken you longer than 12 months to complain. So for example, you're anxious, you didn't know our service existed, etc. So you may just explain in your complaint letter, and then our president, who's like the leader of our organisation, she will review that and have a look at that and see if we can accept it. So if your complaint isn't resolved at conciliation, it can go to a tribunal, and this is called the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal. This is completely separate to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. This was 23 separate tribunals which have been merged into one. So if it isn't resolved through our free service, you can then request it be sent to the tribunal. It's like a court, its hearings are public, and its decisions are legally binding and no longer confidential. It's important to say that solicitors are normally used, but you can choose to not to use one. But you would need to pay your own legal costs. We do have some examples of young people, for example, who experience discrimination. who went to community legal centres and were able to get a what we call a pro bono, which is a free lawyer, a solicitor that simply said that they would take the person to the tribunal and back them for free. So, but solicitors are normally used during this service. I also haven't mentioned to you that it's important to say there are other agencies that can deal with complaints other than Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, and you've probably heard their names like Fair Work Ombudsman and the Australian Human Rights Commission. So, please feel free to, if you're, for example, if your issue is about work, to bring Fair Work, and also if your issue is about carers' responsibilities or some of the types of discrimination I've mentioned, feel free to talk to the Australian Human Rights Commission, and they cover the whole of Australia. So my organisation just covers New South Wales, where the Australian Human Rights covers the whole of Australia, and also they cover similar grounds and areas to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Okay, so here's some information about how to contact us. So if you want to contact us, there's you can ring the 9268 5544 number, or you can ring the 1800 670 812 toll-free number. You can also email us, just a generic email in terms of wanting some inquiries, wanting your inquiry answered on adbcontact@justice.newsouthwales.gov.au. I've also included my mobile number and my email number there, specifically because if you don't feel comfortable or confident in terms of trying to ring those services, I can try and find out the answers to your questions. And I'm also available to do any community information sessions in your community. If you specifically want to make a complaint to us, feel free to have a look at our internet site at antidiscrimination.justice.newsouthwales.gov.au and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. But also you can email us specifically a complaint as opposed to an inquiry. So the first email I gave you was just simply an inquiry. But if you decide that you want to email us a complaint, go to complaints, send an email to complaints@justice.newsouthwales.gov.au. And if you want to download a complaint form and fill that out, and that's a really good guide because it gives you sections of the complaint form where you're able to look, what's your name, what happened to you, what date, and it gives you basically boxed sections, which are a really good guide to filling in a complaint. Even if you send us a letter, you might use that as a guide. Also, it's important to say, if you go on our internet site, there's information in community languages. We also have an Auslan video, and we have accessible documents as well. So I'd just like to thank you, Carers New South Wales, in particular, for asking me to do this session, and thank you for listening, and feel free to ask any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. That was really, really informative. I think Sarah and I got a lot out of it, and I'm sure anyone else listening on the call did as well. So we do have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you want to kick off with your question on behalf of a carer?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. Claire, do young carers need parental consent if they are going to lodge a formal complaint?
No, they don't. Yeah, they can make a complaint to us on their own behalf. Yeah, or on behalf. Obviously, if they're making a complaint about a parent or another person, they would need that person's permission. But if they're lodging it about themselves, no, they don't need their parents' permission.
Okay, great.
And we have had young children, school children before, lodge complaints with us. But it's not as common, and my work throughout working with young people over the few years I've been doing this project is a lot of people aren't aware, and they're not of our service, and they're not aware that they can make a complaint. They often feel like they've got to be 18, and they're not aware that they think it's a paid service.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. A question I have here is, is, do you have any tips for any adults, parents, or professionals who are supporting young carers who might be experiencing discrimination?
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I think it's important. There's lots of agencies, not just like Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, where you can make a formal complaint. There are obviously agencies that will provide supportive documents and even supportive programs like, Black Dog or Beyond Blue, for example. There's also a lot of schools, for example, if it was in the school or even in an organisation, schools and organisations should have policies regarding bullying, harassment and discrimination and how you can deal with a complaint. So I'd suggest to them if for parents specifically to do a little bit of research. Feel free to ring our inquiry line and ask if it's happening, for example, at school. Go on into the internet and find out what their policy is. I mean, I had an experience with my daughter at school where we had to actually request those documents because the school wasn't handling the bullying and harassment appropriately. So that can sometimes trigger if you actually have a look at those documents and then talk to the organisation, but only if you feel comfortable. Sometimes people don't feel that they can resolve the situation with the organisation itself, and that's okay. They want to come to us. But if you do feel that you can't comfortable, have a talk to the organisation, whether it be the workplace or the school or so forth, and see if you can resolve it first that way, only if you feel comfortable to do so.
Great, thanks, Claire. Another question I have is around young carers and if they're able to have a support worker or professional case manager advocate on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So 2 important things that you've sort of triggered there is, yes, a support worker can make a complaint on behalf of a young person. And also when we have the conciliation, it's really important that people know that any person can have a support person with them during the conciliation process, because it's daunting. It's sometimes a bit scary because you're not used to it. But we have to tell you that a conciliation process is really informal. It's not like a court of law. So it's online like we are today. And then what our conciliators will do will try and make you feel comfortable and say, well, look, we're just going to have a chat and chat with both lots of people. So for you to have that support person there on the day would be really great. And if they're not available, you can always have a friend or a relative or someone you choose.
Brilliant. I think it's a really important point to note. 2 points there about having support people with you and about the comfort level that comes with being in these environments, and trying not to be too scared, I guess, or too anxious about what might be to come, because it would be very daunting being in that when you haven't done it before. So
yeah, absolutely. For sure.
I think I might do one last question, and you might not have any specific information around this, but just thinking about a young carer who might be in a part-time role or casual work while studying or while still at school, if they feel like they might be experiencing some discrimination in the workplace, do you have any tips or advice on who is the best person to speak with in terms of going to a direct supervisor or straight to HR? I imagine it's quite unique to different circumstances, but anything you would like to add there, Claire, on that?
Sure. Well, in most workplaces would have sort of grievance handling processes, and a lot of organisations which are large, for example, if you think of young people and part-time work, there might be a lot of the large sort of fast food outlets which would provide training at the beginning of your employment and would provide that sort of information on how to handle an issue if you've got a problem at work. Go directly to your supervisor. So sometimes the young person mightn't feel comfortable going to the supervisor because the supervisor may be the person that they're complaining about. So you might want to go to the person above the supervisor. Maybe you don't feel comfortable doing that because you've just started at work and so forth. So you may want to ring our inquiry line and get some advice. Sometimes young people can be parts of unions when they have certain jobs. Get some advice from your union as well. And if it's, for example, something to do with school, you can always have a chat to like one of the counsellors at school, and they would probably step you through some of the processes as well. So it's important that young people get as much information as possible, but we do understand that young people don't always feel comfortable. Remember, you can ring an inquiry line, whether it be Australian Human Rights or Anti-Discrimination New South Wales or even Fair Work. You can ring an inquiry line and remain confidential. You don't have to give your name. So you could just find out as much information as possible. And you can, if you want to give your details, you can ask for as much information as possible and make your choice. Bring up a couple of services. I always tell people to try and get as much information as possible to try and understand there are many choices in terms of if you want to make a complaint. You could come to Anti-Discrimination New South Wales or the Australian Human Rights Commission. You could use either service just get as much information as possible in terms of making up your mind. In saying that, don't get too confused, because there's a lot of organisations out there, and we don't want you to get confused as well. So just get as much information as you need that you feel comfortable with, and there's possibly somebody at Carers New South Wales who can help you in terms of directing you in the right direction.
Absolutely. Always happy to help. Thank you so much, Claire, for your time this afternoon. It's been a privilege having you with us, chatting about such an important topic of conversation. If anyone's listening either live now or even after the fact, hopefully this will go online shortly. So if you have any questions after watching this session, please feel free to email either Sarah or myself at the Young Carer team. Give us a call at Carers New South Wales and we can filter questions through to Claire. Otherwise, her contact information was on the previous slide. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to hear from you if anything comes up for you after today. So thank you again so much, Claire. We really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a really lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.